This is the brand new A1, Sony's new flagship camera. And right off the bat, I just gotta say, Sony is on fire with these cameras. I was not expecting to review a legit, really great camera till much later in the year. This came out of nowhere for me. But don't be misled by this small camera size. This is like the 1DX Mark III competitor. Just like the 1DX Mark II was kind of this all-in-one photo and video combo king, this is that, just done a lot better, at least in my opinion. For me, the 1DX Mark III was a little bit of a letdown, but this is the camera where if you want to do photo and video, you do not have to sacrifice quality on either. This is the hybrid king. They literally packed everything into this camera. Let's start off with the photo side. 50 megapixel up to 30 frames per second. That's insanely fast. Listen to this. That's absurd. So fast. And then in silent mode, you can't even tell. I'm taking 30 photos per second right now. You hear nothing. Part of how they're able to do this is they have now integral memory built into the sensor, so they're just able to burst these photos like crazy. You could literally shoot raw video in bursts using the photos right now, which is absurd. And Sony's doing a lot of really interesting things inside of the camera that's like above my pay grade. I don't really understand everything to do with like the stacked sensor system or the new next gen Beyonce XR image processing engine. It's incredibly fast, which means you have really fast readout speeds and you can do things like 30 frames per second and not have any blackout. You're not getting any like in and out. You're seeing the photos and then it's going to a black screen. It's just, you can see it the whole time because this processing system is so fast. It's actually doing 120 autofocus calculations per second. That doesn't even make sense to me. And they're even claiming that it has the world's fastest mechanical shutter flash sync speed at 1/400. That's pretty crazy. And they're able to essentially get reduced flicker or get rid of flicker completely with certain LED or fluorescent bulbs with these crazy fast readouts. And these speeds also help out with the video side. They're able to oversample on 8.6K to 8K video and with not too much rolling shutter. It's pretty good. You see, with video, they're having to process each frame, and if it takes too long to process, the top is a little out of sync with the bottom, so you get this kind of like rolling shutter effect where straight lines are kind of on an angle because it's taking too long. And with these speeds, even with an 8K sensor, not too much rolling shutter at all. The EVF now has a refresh rate of 240 frames per second. So if you're into using an EVF, this might be one of the best. Now for me, I almost never use the EVF. I just like using the LCD screen, but it's really nice to have. Crazy fast autofocus, no issues there at all. And you even have human and animal eye detection. And you also have the new bird autofocus. Like all of this stuff, I really like that Sony is doing the things that really matter, the things that we don't really see. They're in the camera, making these speeds super fast and starting to use some of this AI and software to make their cameras better, including the pixel shift mode. So if 50 megapixels wasn't enough for you, you can take a photo that's 199 megapixels big. That's crazy. They're basically like doing this little shift thing, taking 16 photos, putting it together, 199 megapixels. Then let's talk video, which is my favorite. But first, we gotta thank the incredible people at Storyblocks for sponsoring this video. Storyblocks allows for you to make more videos with unlimited downloads of a massive library of over 1 million different assets, and it's an affordable subscription. We were actually gonna do this ad read in that last video while we were in the ice bath, but I think with all the adrenaline and everything, I think we forgot about that. Forgive us. I'm kind of bummed because I think it would have been pretty funny. But Storyblocks isn't just really great stock footage. So if you need, you know, some cool Iceland footage or some New York footage to stick into your video, you got it. They also have a lot of other stuff like sound effects or graphic overlays for your videos. Basically, Storyblocks is the way to get that extra B-roll, that extra quality, that little bit of spice for your videos. Or to make that impossible client video where they want you to travel the world and get footage from all over and the budget just doesn't match, Storyblocks has you covered. Go and check out the link in the description, and thank you Storyblocks for sponsoring this video. Okay, let's talk video. It is incredible. The 8K up to 30 frames per second looks amazing. I'm not seeing a massive difference between the Pixel Bin 4K and the 8K. Yes, there's a difference, like you can see in my brother's beard, but this feels weird. This might be the first time that I'm like, yeah, 8K makes sense. The 8K is 420, no pixel binning, and it's oversampled from 8.6K to 8K. Now, you can only shoot in the HS codec, the high efficiency codec, I think the H.265, and so that is gonna be harder on your computer. But for some reason, when we were editing with it, it was working really smoothly, at least on our Mac Pro. Granted, that is a $27,000 computer, but no issues at all. I thought it was gonna be like stuttering the whole time and just like unusable to edit with, like the R5 8K footage. You just could not really do it. Here, it was pretty smooth. No idea what's going on there, but this is the first time where I'm like, 8K, yeah, I think I could maybe use 8K in my videos, which sounds really weird because I only recently started using 4K. Before I was just doing 1080 and then just upscaling it to 4K to get more quality. And to say now that 8K might make sense to use, okay. The 4K 120 frames per second looks so good, just so nice. And 240 frames per second in 1080, I love it. It's just so fun to use, especially when there's a lot of action or a lot of movement. Like in the chainsaw shots, it just looks so beautiful. It kind of seems like the Sony A7S III, but with just an 8K option. And even the dynamic range seems to be even better. Gerald Undone did some, his scientific test, and he was getting quite a bit more dynamic range than even the Sony A7S III, which did really well. So overall, this camera, this image is just really surprising to me. I think part of that is when you just have all these specs on paper, you kind of start thinking like there's gotta be a catch. Something's not gonna be as good as it seems. There's gotta be some sacrifice somewhere. But I'm not really seeing that much of that here. 16-bit 4K raw output up to 60 frames per second. That's gonna be really great for a lot of people. But one of the best, if not the best feature for me, is the S-Cinetone colors. So this is the color science from their like high-end cinema cameras. They're bringing it down to now their mirrorless cameras, and it looks so good. I already thought that the Sony A7S III colors were really nice, and I was kind of saying that this might be better than Canon color science in my opinion. With S-Cinetone, I can pretty confidently say that this is way better than the Canon mirrorless or DSLR cameras have in terms of color science. The skin tones just look so true to life, so accurate, but it still has this like film-like nice cinematic quality to it. I honestly really wish they would add this to the Sony A7S III. It is such a great feature. I didn't have a chance to test it out, but you can do the APS-C crop, so you can make it into a crop sensor, which means that your lenses are gonna be a little bit more zoomed in, which has its benefits sometimes. And I assume, I didn't have a chance to test it out, that you're not gonna really have any quality difference because you have all of this sensor to oversample from. So that's a really nice, handy feature for when you just need to get a little bit more zoomed in. And maybe you're thinking, well, of course, it's gonna overheat. We saw the Canon R5. Well, no. Like, the overheating seems to be really under control. Both Gerald Undone, I saw, tested it, and Potato Jet tested it in like 40 degrees Celsius, and both of them were getting over an hour of 8K recording at one time, which is way more, I think, than anybody would ever need in 8K right now. We, of course, we're in freezing cold temperatures, so obviously we're not gonna have any issues with that. but it's really nice to know that you can count on it. And I think even more important is that if it does overheat, it doesn't take like 20 minutes to wait for it to kind of cool down. It's only like a minute and you get a lot more record time right away. So you're not gonna have any overheating issues with this camera. At least that's what I'm seeing and that's what I'm hoping. We got the IBIS with no wobbles. Again, I don't think it's quite as strong, or maybe it's the fast readout, but you're not getting any of those crazy wobbles like you do on the R5. That's pretty nice. Dual card slots for all you dual card slot freaks. And the nice thing is that both of them take CF Express and SD, just like on the A7S III. Oh, and no record limit. You can record as long as you want. So what is the downside? Before, we get too excited, what's the downside? Well, it's this. No flip LCD screen, just one of these tilt ones, and that is a bummer, especially because we got it on the Sony A7S III and I love it. It's so good. And then this just feels like a really big step back. I don't know who is advocating for this. This is not the way to go. I get it. Some people like for it to be kind of lined up with the lens and all that, but you can still put it in the same way. The problem with this is that if you do vertical portrait photos like most of us do for Instagram and stuff, you can't tilt it up to you, so you can't see when you're taking a photo from up high and you're trying to get down, or you're going really low and you're trying to point up. You can't see what you're doing, and that really sucks. And then not to mention for video, having that flip LCD screen pretty much means you don't need an external monitor for most situations. Now with this, you might need one, which kind of sucks. That's the biggest bummer of this camera. No flip LCD screen, especially if you were thinking about vlogging with it, using it as your all-in-one cinematic footage, really high quality photos, and vlogging. The vlogging, you can do it, but it's not quite as nice. Other than that, the body is almost identical to the Sony A7S III. It's a little bit different. The record button is in the back instead of on top, which I was actually really liking on top. And then on the left side, we have a new dial with some controls for photos, like your drive mode or your AF mode, and I really like that. The base ISO is 800 instead of 640 on the A7S III, which is like a tiny bit of a bummer. It doesn't really matter that much, but you're gonna have to add more ND if you're outside. And the low light, like you would expect, isn't quite as good as the Sony A7S III, but it's really good. Way better than I expected because it is 50 megapixels instead of the 12 megapixels on the Sony A7S III. But I also kind of noticed that the noise seems to be a little bit finer, a little bit smaller, I assume because the pixels are smaller on the A1. So I think you could get away with a little bit more noise and you'd be able to denoise it a lot easier. Whereas on the A7S III, when it gets noisy, the blocks, the noise, they're bigger, and so therefore it's harder to denoise. So yeah, you're not getting the low light performance of the Sony A7S III because it has much bigger pixels. It can take in much more light, but I don't think you're gonna have any issues with low light. All in all, this to me is the new 1DX Mark II, the hybrid camera that can do both photo and video without really having to sacrifice quality on either side. This is the hybrid camera king right now, to me at least. It's not perfect. I would love a flip LCD screen, but it's pretty dang good. So the final question is, who is this camera for? It is $6,500 for just the body. So this is definitely for the pros. This is not for the average camera person. I like doing a little bit of photo or a little bit of video. This is for the professionals. I would have loved this camera when we were shooting weddings because it can do both photo and video really well. I could just have this one camera and do everything. That's really amazing. I could see travel people who, want to do those cinematic videos, but also want those IG banger photos. This is going to be a really great camera. And then of course, anybody and anything to do with sports, this is the camera. I don't see why you wouldn't go for the Sony A1 if you're really big on sports and action photography. Am I going to be switching to the A1? Probably not. I think the Sony A7S III fits my filmmaking style a little bit better, but I think I might bring it alongside, so when we're filming some epic cinematic stuff, we might just use the A1, and for photos, obviously, it's gonna be so much better. So I think I might start using both, but the A7S III is still gonna be way better for YouTube filmmaking and vlogging. Sony is on a hot streak. They are just killing it, and I'm really curious to see how Canon answers to this. What's their R1 or whatever they're gonna call it gonna be like? Because the bar has been raised really high, and Sony is just taking it to the next level one after another. And I feel like this is the camera where they're just like, let's just put everything in there. Forget every other camera we have. Let's just put everything we have into this one camera. The competition is real, and I think we are benefiting from that in a big way. All right, that's it for me, guys. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.